I read this last time. This is Leviticus 19:34. Right after it says, love your neighbor as yourself, it goes a step further. And the step further is this. It says, the stranger who resides with you, okay, shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So I highlighted last time. It says Hager, Hagar. So the ger, the stranger, the outsider. Let's make sure we understand terminology. In Hebrew, ger is somebody who lives. If you see those two words besides each other, ger is the first one. That's a person. And the next one is a verb, Hagar. The person, the dweller who dwells. The sojourner who sojourns. I mean, this is how Hebrew it is. He uses the verb, he uses the word in a noun form, and then it uses that same exact word in the verb form. I mean, in some ways, it's the simplicity of Hebrew, and in some ways, it's the beauty of Hebrew. The dweller who dwells, the sojourner who sojourns, and it's the same exact word. So this ger, this outsider, different translations of Torah that you're going to pull up is going to say sometimes an alien, sometimes that word will be translated as stranger. But this essentially is an outsider of some sorts. So this outsider is to be to you like a native. It says ke'ezrach. It actually, in Hebrew, it begins with that. As a native, ke'ezrach, a stranger shall be, who dwells among you, will be unto you. Who is a ger? Is what we are asking. Who is the stranger? Are we talking about a person who aligns himself with Israel? Or are we talking about a person who's just some average run-of-the-mill idolater passing by? No, Gerim in ancient Israel were a category of people. They're called sojourners, and I like that translation really well, because stranger doesn't quite capture it. Because to dwell, to sojourn, that's what that verb means, to come. So somebody who lives next to you is a neighbor, but somebody who sojourns implies idea that they're sharing some of your values. So there, in ancient Israel, and this has been so throughout all the times, there always have been people who lived in Israel not just as visitors, but as residents. They're saying, this is a place I like to live. These are the people I want to be associated with. And though I'm not one of them, I would like to live in their midst because I really think they have something going. So people might migrate to Israel for economic reasons, and then they stay for others. Now, Gerim were obligated in Torah to follow a lot of rules. There's a lot of commandments that are given to Gerim, to these sojourners. There's another category of people in the Torah called the Nochri. Nochri are outsiders of a different type. They're more along the line of visitors. They're passerbys. They're not residents. They're aliens, but they're non-resident aliens. They're not people who are saying, I want to live here, I want to make my life here, I want to raise my kids and my family, I want a job here. They're people who are coming in, I'm coming in to do some business, whatever, and later on I'm going to leave. I like you people, you have something good going, let's do business together, but I'm going to go back to my country. Okay? So essentially, it comes down to the loyalty to the locals. It comes down to the loyalty to the place where you live. So if you settle somewhere, you settled somewhere. It becomes yours. You buy property. You make friends. You send your kids to school. You start voting. Whatever local rights that you're being granted or given, you become a part of a community and you start fitting in. And so as a part of this fitting in, the Gerim were actually told to do quite a few things in the Torah. They weren't allowed to worship idols. Gerim were not to bring their own gods and goddesses. They were to worship the God of Israel. They were limited in how they could worship, but they could bring sacrifices to Mishkan, and they could bring it to the tent of meeting. At the door of the tent of meeting, the priest would meet them and take their sacrifice and actually bring it to the altar and offer it. And that was the way in which a ger, a sojourner, would join themselves to the people of Israel, even in worship. There were certain things that they weren't allowed to, eat. For example, they couldn't start raising pigs, for example, commercially in the middle of a Jewish community. That would be a literally very unkosher business, right? So there were certain limitations, but then there are some things that the Gerim were allowed to do that Israelites were not allowed to do. By the way, if you read in the Torah, Gerim were allowed to eat terefah. So that means an animal that has fallen sick and died. The Gerim are allowed to eat it, Israelites are not. God tells Israelites, you shall not eat it. If you find an animal that was attacked by another animal, let's say torn or something like that, in a field, like a wild animal attacked your cow, you are not allowed to eat it. But it says you can give it to a ger, or you could sell it to a nochri. So you sell it to an alien, or you give it to a resident, but you yourselves are not allowed to. Why? Very simple. Because you're holy. You're holy people. You're separate. You're different. I have a different set of rules for you. Why? Because you are mine. You're holy people. You represent me. So there's a different relationship, essentially. But Gerim were a part of Israel, and they were part of the worship of Israel, and there's quite a few rules that they had to keep, like Shabbat and things like that. So like if you decided to open a business, you're not going to be open on Shabbat. So you get a little marquee on one of the streets of Jerusalem. Guess what? You're shut down. Why? Because you're a ger. You follow the local rules, and the local rule says Shabbat is holy. We don't do business. So you close it. You could be defiant, but you would be immediately, you're an outsider, and you will lose your lease. Let's put it that way. And so there are these rules. So excellent question. Hopefully I gave you a good answer.